The Journey Through a Distant Land, The Metaphysical Articles of the Individuality, written by Javon Lately, NB. Article 1.2, Continuation. Reading 5. Let's start with what we have come to understand so far. Satan is an invisible, intelligent, negative force. In order for him to be known, he manifested an image for himself, so he can be seen, heard, and recognized throughout the universe. This image is the false personality, which is the ego, or as the author Beth Crisella would say, evil growing out in mankind. Now, it was said above that the true self, who is Elohim, did not give the power to Satan to create or the power to destroy. So how did Satan acquire this concept to manifest himself in an image? Now, if Satan did not create this concept, then this concept had to be already in existence. Without the power to create, you must by default mimic what has already been established. I will now introduce the nature of our Father, our Creator, the wonderful head of days. I will use the titles you are accustomed to for the sake of communication. Who the world calls the Lord, the first principle, the Creator, is an all-prevailing, invisible power of untold love and glory, clothed with unspeakable holiness. This one and only Creator wanted to be known and seen. He wanted to be heard and loved. He wanted to be understood. For how can you worship anything you can't understand? The divine intelligence understood this. So he gave all of himself to sons and daughters that are formed by these attributes. Like him, they too have taken on his image and his likeness. In order to accomplish this, who the world calls the Lord, from his divine wisdom, decided to make an image for himself, which is the true self, the divine image, the pattern of Elohim that pleases him of the universe. This image, who the world calls the Lord created, can be understood as coming from incomprehensibility and invisibility to that which can be seen and comprehended. Thus, we have two invisible forces capable of being manifested in images with power to appear to our limited senses. One of the reasons it must appear in this fashion is because of the realm of time and space that came into being as this physical fleshly domain appeared when mankind learned the knowledge of good and evil, that is represented by eating. Man was not physical flesh in his first form. The way he ate was through a learning and an accumulation of knowledge. The physical flesh was naturally vouchsafed to mankind to allow a set time to understand or to digest the knowledge they chose to devour. Seeing now that their fleshly body deteriorates during time, time is that mechanism that forces the secondary form of man, which is flesh, to transform from visibility to invisibility. This can give the appearance that the total person is gone, but in actuality, it's only the second form that is gone, which has nothing to do with the first form. The original invisible form that mankind has problems believing is real only because of the beast of Satan that beguiled its way inside of mankind. The proof of this notion is in the very nature of who the world calls the Lord. But unfortunately, the five senses of the fleshly body is ruling mankind, not allowing them to see what's real. The five senses of our disposition are the functions that Satan is using to initiate his rule over mankind. Mankind is totally convinced that anything that cannot be calculated and measured by the five senses is not real, but is merely fantasy. Over time, which is the domain of Satan, of which he is well aware that its end is very near, nevertheless, Satan has worked to keep the spiritual domain away from mankind. He accomplished this feat by using what he discovered through scientific experimental evaluation, which is the experience starting from Adam to this generation, of the things he found to be desirable to mankind. One of the things he studied with great diligence was the sexual nature in man. I would like to stop here to elaborate on a divine axiom. When who the world calls the Lord created all things, he brought forth from himself, meaning that the things that he brought forth were his children. All living things brought forth produced pleasure to the being of who the world calls the Lord. And since man is made in his image and in his likeness, man was endowed with the power to create, to bring forth from himself a being in his own image and likeness. When mankind procreates, an extremely great pleasure is produced in his being also. As a result, mankind has developed an enormous appetite for this feeling and severely abuses the sexual faculties. Satan now sees this as a weakness and harnesses this loss of energy to mankind's demise. Maybe I will decide to elaborate further on this subject later. I have spoken a great deal of it already. It is advised that you listen and observe your inner reasoning. You should listen to the reasoning in your mind about what was just said. If you haven't considered the reality of these things, which were just spoken, two types of reasonings may now occur in your mind. First, you could be hearing an inner reasoning in your thinking apparatus in the wise of negativity. Your mind could be fighting against this new knowledge, doubting its veracity. The other alternative is that your mind could be receptive to this new knowledge, which is not new but has been hidden from the forefront of your mind. Satan has carefully cloaked this underlying process of the mind by the stimulation of the fleshly five senses. If the later is true, I am marveling over this notion. Not many can bypass these five senses. If you are thinking in this wise, you are now at this time out of the five senses and out of the mundane reasoning. You are now penetrating through extreme wickedness. Being able to receive spiritual concepts is amazing, especially in this dispensation of time when Satan instigated and influenced the development of our knowledge to procure and produce our modern technology. This modern technology is initiating great illusions. It is broadcasting and brainwashing mankind with Satan's agenda. This technology has been drilled in our minds and is growing within our very being to the point that we think it is normal. The new age technology is a medium to broadcast Satan's power and will. He is using this to promote what is evil and stifling in the guise of something good and acceptable. This is preventing mankind from rising in consciousness and brings to the standstill any chance to see and hear the image of who the world calls the Lord, who is the true self, thereby causing mankind to be more and more absorbed in the fleshly five senses. Wherefore, mankind is blinded to see only his image, with all the physical power to manipulate the material world restricted to Satan's use. Satan is the prince and the god of this physical world. If your common sense is clouded, or your faculty to observe the world around you is inert, it is due to his influence over you. You can find out about this and more in the basic instructions before leaving Earth, that this mundane world and the riches thereof were produced by Satan, the adversary. You would also see that who the world calls the Lord allows him to give these earthly riches, glory, and the power to whoever Satan decides to give it to. There are specific qualifications that you need to have to be worthy to receive these gifts from Satan. The main one is to bow down to his image, who is the false personality, the ego, in you. Satan, the adversary, who has an invisible nature, can only operate through mankind's inability to observe himself. Man cannot see himself because this invisible evil force cannot and will not ever be detected by the five senses of the human biological organism. In order to see this kind of operation, one would have to gain and procure a certain knowledge, especially designed for this recognition. If a person is able to procure this knowledge, that person would have to test this new knowledge to prove to themselves the veracity of its application. Mankind will have to observe the reaction it has on their environment. This will never happen to a man or woman unless he or she gives up the mundane knowledge. Not giving up one's ability to benefit from earthly knowledge, but to use this education towards this new spiritual reality. This notion is a very hard thing to apply by mankind, because this new knowledge is not what people are accustomed to doing. Many people was not brought up on this use of knowledge. Most of us grew up on an accumulation of carnal knowledge based on the mechanics of earthly living, and a physical education that is only used for mundane existence. This person who is the rich man in this earthly knowledge is functioning and living in the false personality that is only useful in this world formed by the negative force, who is Satan, of which the man or woman foolishly believe is its own personality. This rich man with the false personality would have to sacrifice the false personality to allow the poor man, which is the soul, to flourish. This man would have to build an altar to sacrifice the false personality upon an order to let the true self go free. I will now show you a wonder, and if you understand this wonder, you will no longer be incapable of understanding spiritual concepts. Listen carefully. The altar is a real place formed in the mind, motivated by the humbleness of the heart, a decision to live the spiritual life. This decision will cause one to see and to do the necessary spiritual action by deciding to activate spiritual concepts that very moment, which is formed out of holy and lofty thoughts. The man or woman would have to build this altar very firm and stern. Lo,
the spiritual blueprint.
the person that is constructing this altar will have to weigh out the materials needed for this construction. This material is a mixture of the knowledge of the false personality and the knowledge of the Elohim, the true self, the creator. Next, you will have to lay out the material. This is the contemplation on the knowledge, forming it to become your own understanding. The next step is hammering the concepts, thereby developing a great establishment of these concepts into your being, making a firm commitment to these new understandings. Then one will smooth out the top of this altar to fortify this construction by pondering the new ideals that issue out of this new building project. Once this is done, you can now lay the sacrifice on the spiritual altar. The person will first take their own false personality and present it on this new construction. I will go into details on what this false personality is in the next article, but for now, it is needed to know that this is not to be given half-heartedly. If one gives this sacrifice half-heartedly, the fires from the heavens, the higher levels of consciousness, will not come down to consume your sacrifice. This fire will be not like the form of fire you see here on earth, the fire, the earthly element that you use for heat and for the preparation of earthly food. The fire which we speak about will be in a form of suffering by humiliation and deprivation, consuming all those false concepts of the false personality. The whole personality will have to be sacrificed. It would have to become passive to allow the growth of essence, which is the real you, the soul inside. If a person does fully sacrifice the ego, the beast, along with the false prophet, the man or woman will see a fire come down out of the higher states of consciousness. And that man or woman will be vouchsafed a power from the higher consciousness, which is the ability to be self-aware of the fallen thoughts that are seducing that individual. This will entitle anyone who sacrificed this false personality to also have the power to command those fallen thoughts in harmony with the will of Elohim. This fire will take the form of a specific test, testing all those new understandings that are understood by the soul. For example, some of the things that a person used to think, feel, and do when he or she was connected to the false personality. If the person can pass the entire test by not actualizing in the physical world those things that are thought of and felt in the invisible state of being, that person will gain a power from the true self to rise to a higher state of consciousness. The person who is baptized by this fire will hereafter be a new creature, closely connected to the true self, constantly rising in scale of glory and light. End of Article 1.2 and end of Reading 5.